So our next speaker is Noel Gollehon. He is Senior Economist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service of USDA, and he's got a very distinguished background in looking at national water, and I'm going to let Pam Justice here know in the front. He's told me he needs about 2 extra minutes, so I'm not going to take the cane up and pull him off the stage. I'm going to give him that time, and he may explain why he needs that extra time. Noel, thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Well, welcome everyone, and it's great to be in Arizona at the Water Conference. So Sharon mentioned that I needed a couple extra minutes. Well, yeah, sure, she asked me to do all these things in this talk, and it's hard to fit it all in. So Sharon asked me to do a couple things with this talk. That, first of all, she asked me to talk about irrigation and Arizona irrigation in a national perspective. I work for a national agency, and I have a big picture kind of perspective on irrigation. So with that in mind, 7 states account for about 60% of the irrigated acres in the nation. You see the last 7 censuses of agriculture, Nebraska's finally exceeded California in terms of irrigated area, and you see the major states going across. The ones over on the right side, though on the far side, is of course Arizona, which ranks about 18th in terms of irrigated area, with about 800,000 acres, more than your neighbors to the east of New Mexico and to the northwest of Nevada, but less than Louisiana, before you start feeling too good about that. That's acres. Now, I'm an economist, so when I talk about irrigation, I think about irrigation, I have a slightly different perspective on it. I want to look at what the value of that is. What does it produce in terms of economic activity? So I look at take all the respondents to the Census of Agriculture, put them through this process that I've developed, and come up with an estimate of irrigated sales across the entire nation. I divide it up into regions and into 2 crops types. The first crop type is irrigated grain. And here you see that the northern plains, the little green area in the bottom map there, is the largest producer of crop sales from irrigated agriculture for grains. And it's dominated by corn, as you see. The final thing on this slide to note is note the scale. It goes to about $10 billion. Because when we look at non-grain crops, the first thing you should notice is the scale. It goes to about $40 billion. So the difference between grain and non-grain crops is significant in terms of the value of their production. And also you note on this is that the Pacific region, i.e. California, Oregon, and Washington, dominate the chart for the US. As a matter of fact, the Pacific region produces more than the entire rest of the US in terms of irrigated non-grain sales. And the big kahuna on this process is orchards, with over $20 billion of irrigated sales. Can we say almonds, please? Bringing it to Arizona, that is consistent with Arizona. If you look at how Arizona's sales break down by crop, the non-grain crops, once again, are the most important contributor to the sales and the agriculture production of the state. But instead of orchards here, it's vegetables, followed by forage, horticulture, cotton, and finally orchards. And then the most important grain crop is wheat that's produced here. As we have already heard this morning, it sometimes takes a circuitous route to a restaurant in Tucson of how that wheat gets utilized. In terms of Arizona's total sales, a little over $2 billion in irrigated ag sales, which is 55% of the total state's farm gate sales, and about 44% in livestock. So that's a significant chunk of money. I mean, $2 billion, that is a big farm gate sale. And how does it achieve that? Well, it achieves that relatively high ranking in total sales, which was about 10th in the nation, because it punches above its weight. Arizona, as you can see, is significantly above the national average in per acre sales value. So it can be 17th in terms of acres and 10th in terms of sales. And that brings me to how an economist likes to look at that importance of irrigation. Rather than the slide I started with was just acres, This is sales and acres combined, with California being the most important state in terms of sales, and Arizona making the top 10 in terms based on the irrigated, on the sales, even though it is not as high on the acres. So that was my brief introduction to framing Arizona agriculture in a national context. So now I'm going to start the real purpose I came to this meeting, which was to talk about irrigation, water, conservation, and efficiency. This is words that you've already heard this morning. As a matter of fact, Dean Burgess, when he started out this morning, he talked about water efficiency, water productivity, and water use in a conservation context. So these are words we use all the time. They're really hard. When you get down to it, they're really hard. What is irrigation and water conservation? Is it a reduction in water diverted, a reduction in water applied, a reduction in water consumed? Or is it no reduction in water at all, but just producing more output? So you have more crop per drop without changing quantity of water at all. And then finally, and we have irrigation efficiency. We have a definition for this. And it's often improved with new technology or new management. We can do this, and that's what we do. We do a lot of improving irrigation efficiency. I want to talk about how that sort of plays out a bit. And finally, improving irrigation efficiency, being an economist, improving efficiency is good. We get more, it improves productivity, and improves profitability. I want to look at water first, because it's water efficiency. Let's look at water. This is the national withdrawals of water for irrigation, and it's divided by region. And what I observe here, first of all, is that the light blue, surface water is important in the Pacific and mountain regions of the US, and groundwater is important everywhere. Nationally, about 58% of the irrigation water comes from surface. The other 42% from ground. In Arizona, it's even higher. There's 63% surface water versus 37% groundwater. This graph shows irrigated acres and water applications. The green being acres from 1969 to 70 to 80 to 2012. So during this period of time, we went from about 39 million irrigated acres to 55 plus million irrigated acres, and that's an increase of about 43% in terms of irrigated area. At the same time, our per acre water applications, which is the blue line here to the right axis, changed from about 25 inches per acre to about less than 19, for a decline of about 24% in terms of total water applied per acre. So we had this growth in acres, decline in irrigated per acre applications. How did we accomplish this decline in per acre applications? Well, it's the real estate mantra, first of all, where it was, and second, it's improved efficiency and management, improved and more efficient management and technology. So here's the location part of that equation. The red is areas that result in our indications of reduced acreage from 1978 to 2012. The blue is an increase. So what you see here is basically a reduction in the west and south, where it's hotter and drier, and an increase in the eastern and northern reaches, where it is wetter and cooler. As a result, less water is needed. You take an acre of alfalfa out of Arizona, 5 acre feed application, you put that acre in Louisiana or Mississippi, and we're putting on 9 inches. That changes the total addition across the nation a lot. The other part of that was technology. So this is changing technology from 1979 to 2013. The more efficient technologies are toward the top of the chart, like drip, trickle, and micro, and low pressure center pivots. Note, low pressure center pivots were not even on the chart in 1979, and now they're almost a quarter of irrigated acres. As that has occurred, we've had a decline in systems that are sometimes perceived to be not as efficient, even though I'll argue with you on that. and that is gravity, which has declined from over 60% to about 40% of the irrigated acres. So now I would like to talk a bit about what does that mean? What does it mean when you go from a less efficient system to a more efficient system? I want to take a field view of this. So we have this field, and it has, think of it as a gravity irrigated field. That's the easiest way to visualize it, at least I find it is. And we put water on the field. At the top of the field, it runs to the bottom. So we have the field area across the bottom of the slide. And we have some infiltration depth where the water ran a while, it soaked in further than where it didn't run a while. And so let's take that, and the object of this is to grow a crop. And to grow a crop, we need to meet the water requirements of that crop. So our goal here is to refill the soil profile with water. To accomplish that, we have some base irrigation level that we'd like to see applied to that field. So we have this target out there. And if you compare the target to the infiltrated area, you have an area of over-irrigation and under-irrigation. This is not rocket science, guys. So basically, getting ahead of myself, so when we approve that irrigation system, what we do is we move that application curve something closer to the target line. And the more we can move it to that target line, the less area of over-irrigation and under-irrigation we have. And what we do with that is we basically take the formula for irrigation efficiency that you see here, which is water beneficially used, primarily in that first category there called crop evapotranspiration, because that's what translates to yield and to production from the farmer perspective. And we want to increase that relative to the total amount of water we apply. So there's two ways to do that. One is to reduce the total amount of water we apply, which is something we sometimes do. The other is to reduce the non-beneficial uses of that, which is evaporation, deep percolation, excess runoff. So when we improve that irrigation efficiency, what we're doing is we're increasingly moving toward that target in terms of target irrigation. We're declining the area of field with over and under irrigation, increasing our uniformity, improves our water ET because we're reducing stress on the crop, and we increase our yield, which is a good thing. But that also has some effects, because as we reduce the non-beneficial uses of water, those non-beneficial uses of water are often tied to a word we've also heard this morning, and that is tailwater, what happens downstream of that. So to talk a bit about what happens downstream of that, I want to take a couple minutes to talk about some of the factors that derive efficiency versus conservation in agriculture. And the first I want to talk about is the idea that there's a legal and institutional framework. You have a water right, you have so much water that you can utilize. It's given by the right, you have transfer provisions. If you have to buy rights, there are limits in where you can buy them. And those rights are determined at the state level. Arizona is consistent with much of the West in being a prior appropriation state. But that's one big driver that sets over the agricultural sector and its water use. The second is the hydrologic considerations. How much water is there? Where does it come from? Return flows or runoff? How much surface water? How much groundwater? What sort of flows are required for environmental purposes? And that's most easily represented by a hydrologic budget. Ron Raynard talked a little bit about the difficulty in filling out what effectively is a water budget, as to where his water comes from and goes. Well, this is a simplified water budget, and then if you add irrigation to it, you got a lot more lines you have to keep track of. So the hydrologic forces are an important component of how agriculture faces water. And finally, there's agriculture itself. Water is a relatively low-cost input that's yield increasing, risk minimizing, increases the productivity of other inputs. You have to consider the other inputs, labor and energy, and you want to use it and not waste it. That sweet spot where those three circles come together is where the action is in terms of efficiency and conservation in agricultural water use. And at the basin view, then, let's take those concepts and let's apply them to the water use in this basin. So we have a irrigated area here with a base irrigation efficiency of 50%, because the numbers are a lot easier. We have assume we have a river flowing from the top of the screen to the bottom. So it starts out with 110 units of water and ends up at the bottom with 106. Now remember that red component of the force, that was the legal. Here the legal water right is 8 units of water. It goes to the farm. The farm, remember, only has one decision, and that is how much water they beneficially use for their production. We're going to assume it's 4 for this case. It's 50% efficient, remember? For convenience, I'm assuming the water loss to non-beneficial consumption is 0, because if you add it in, we'll be here all morning working this problem. Which means that 4 units return as return flow, and we have 106 units going out the bottom of the slide. The blue is the hydrologic component of here. Those are all the where does the water come from, where does it go part of the hydrologic equation. But remember, the ag portion is only the green part. Now, let's go from a base system efficiency on the left side of the screen to an improved system efficiency on the right. Remember, only thing we changed here is ag. We changed the ag water beneficial use from 4 to 4.8 units. We still have the same institutional constraints. We still divert the same 8 units. And what does that do in this case? And this is not, I didn't have to make this case up real hard. This happens all the time, but yet it doesn't happen everywhere. This is not universal. But in our particular case, because we use more water with the same amount of diversion, there's less return flow, and there's actually less water below this stretch of the river. And whether you're talking about this is bigger than a farm, whether it's a basin, whether it's an irrigation district area, how big it is, we can discuss. But the point here is that we had a change in agricultural production that made us more efficient, that did not result in increased water downstream. If you define that as conservation, then, we need to talk about that. So improved irrigation efficiency does not assure an increase in downstream flow. You must carefully define the goal as to what it is you want to do in that basin with that improved efficiency. That motivation to reduce withdrawals, that red 8, that institutional factor, that really depends upon the water source and institutional circumstances. If you want to change that, don't talk to the farmer. You need to talk to the institutional drivers. Reducing hydrologic water use, ET, at the field level usually reduces production. And improving technology, while generally increasing private benefits, more acres or higher yield, generally increases private benefits while increasing hydrologic, that is hydrologic use in terms of water. Because you have higher yield, ET, you haul that water out in the back of the truck. That's cautioned by there are institutional adjustments or change that can change that relationship. There's water supply constraints that can change that relationship, which shifts to deficit irrigation, which changes a lot on that chart. Or you can induce a monetary reward for reducing water applications and change that magic 8 in the previous case, that institutional driver, to some other number, but then that means that someone else has to manage that water when it's not managed by the agricultural producer. So I know I'm standing between you and coffee, and I've taken my 2 extra minutes. So I hope I've done a couple things today. One is provide a perspective on Arizona irrigation. The walk away from that is acres do not equal importance. I also wanted to emphasize that improving irrigation efficiency does not automatically translate into water conservation from the agricultural sector. How many times do you see a newspaper article that says, and we're going to find more water for city X by improving the efficiency of agriculture? Yeah, right. Conservation is complex. It depends upon the definition. Do you reduce the hydrologic water use? Do you reduce diversions? What part do you conserve? And it very much depends upon the scale you're talking. Are you talking improved efficiency at the field, the farm, the basin? And perhaps my most important point here, if there is one, is that exclusive focus on one factor, i.e. improving irrigation efficiency, without considering the other components, that being institutional and hydrologic, will often not yield the desired results. And so the standard disclaimers apply. I've put these on, thank you very much. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My contact information's in the speaker list, and unfortunately, I took all my time, and I'm standing between you and coffee. So enjoy your coffee. If you have questions, see me later.